All right, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you're joining us from across Canada. My name is Darian Temporal. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Grapevine Certification Network, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's webinar. So today we are focusing on the techniques to assess cold hardiness in Eastern Canada, where we're going to learn about the final results of Activity 5 from the CAP cluster that ran from 2018 to 2023. And this was because CGCN was the agri-science cluster holder run by AAFC. So please note that this webinar will be recorded, and we will post this on our website afterwards if you wish to view it again or share it with any of your colleagues who weren't able to attend today. So today we're joined by Dr. Andréanne Hébert-Haché from CRAM Research Center in Mirabel, Quebec. And to begin today's webinar, I'll provide a very brief overview of the Grape and Wine Research Cluster and the research themes that it focused on. And then Andréanne will provide a detailed look at the research process and results of Activity 5 and offer useful information for anyone trying to grow grapes in the colder climates of Eastern Canada. And then finally, at the end of the session, we'll hold a Q&A where attendees can ask Andréanne any questions they have about the research. So you can please feel free to type your questions at any time throughout the presentation in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, or you can save them to the end and you can have the opportunity to ask Andréanne directly yourself by putting your hand up, and then we'll give you mic access to ask that yourself. So first, I'll go into my presentation here. So CGCN is a Canada-wide not-for-profit, and we were incorporated in 2017 and comprised of membership from our 4 grape growing associations in Canada, being the British Columbia Wine Grape Council, Grape Growers of Ontario, Council de Vins de Quebec, and the Grape Growers Association of Nova Scotia. And each member association elects up to 2 individuals to sit on our board of directors. We have maintained a mandate that is twofold. So firstly, it's to advance the Canadian grape and wine industry by ensuring a sustainable domestic supply of certified propagated grapevine material, including rootstock and scionwood. And then secondly, which is going to be the focus of today's webinar, we support and promote grape and wine research efforts across the country. And since 2018, we've administered the National Grape and Wine Research Cluster through Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Agri-Science program, which we'll briefly discuss on the upcoming slides. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar, the Grape and Wine Research Cluster is a national research funding program funded in part by the Government of Canada from 2018 to 2023 under the Canadian Agricultural Partnership Framework, which we refer to as CAP. The cluster was made up of several grape and wine related research activities conducted at government research centers, universities, and other industry locations across Canada. The CAP cluster, The CAP cluster framework ended in March 2023. So after giving the involved researchers a couple years to tie up loose ends and potentially publish articles on their work, we're excited to embark on a mini webinar series this spring and summer to finally share the research results of many of these CAP cluster research activities. And as part of our efforts to promote the final research results from the CAP cluster, we are also excited to share that AAFC's Summerland Research and Development Center, along with British Columbia's Wine Grape Council and CGCN, are hosting a national research users meeting on April 17th. So this event will take place both in person at the Summerland Research Center station in BC or virtually on Microsoft Teams. So throughout the day, attendees will get to learn about the final research results from all of the CAP cluster activities that were conducted exclusively by AAFC research centers. So there's a limited availability for the in-person attendance, so make sure to register soon on Eventbrite if you haven't already done so. If you search for this text online, the research users meeting, AAFC research results from the CAP cluster, or something along those lines, then you should be able to register for the in-person or the virtual events on Eventbrite. So CAP cluster activities were organized by theme as follows. So they were listed in the few themes here, but the activities that we will learn about today is Activity 5, which fell under the cold hardiness and adaptation to climate change theme. So this theme examined methods to reduce crop losses by increasing vineyard tolerance to extreme cold events through enhanced hardiness, crop protection technologies, and improved cultivar selection. And before getting into our feature presentation, I also like to let you know that CGCN also currently administers the Grape and Wine Cluster across the Sustainable Agricultural Partnership, which is the SCAP framework. So this contains 15 research activities being conducted, once again, at government research centers, universities, and/or private research facilities across the country. Research is organized into one of three themes or priority areas, what we call them: climate change and the environment, economic growth and development, and sector resilience and societal challenges. We're currently at the very end of year 2 out of 5 of the cluster. So year 1 research summaries, which was from 2023 to 2024, have been available on our website if you'd like to learn more about each of the activities in a little bit more detail. But year 2 research summaries will be available on our website sometime in the summer or early fall of this year. So if you go to our website, you can look and hover over the research heading and click on cluster updates and events, as shown here. So thank you very much for your time, for allowing me to share a little bit about the CGCN Grape and Wine Science Cluster. Ethan and I are both happy to answer any questions you may have with the contact information on the screen here. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I will introduce our speaker for today. So Andréanne Hébert-Haché is a viticulture and enology researcher and director at the Centre de Recherche Agroalimentaire. I said I was going to butcher it, and I did. De Mirabel, or CRAM, is what I'm going to refer to it as, in Mirabel, Quebec. She recently completed her PhD in biological sciences at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, with a specialization in plant sciences, enology, and viticulture. Her PhD research focused on characterizing the influence of clone and rootstock selection on grapevine cold hardiness. She joined the CRAM in October 2021, where, among other responsibilities, she oversees the current viticulture research projects. She hopes to continue developing new research opportunities in enology and viticulture to benefit the Quebec grape and wine industry. So, Andréanne, take it away.
Great. Trying to share my screen quickly, like if I knew what I was doing. There we go. You can see it. I'm assuming you can see it. That's how it is. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to present this work. Activity 5, like Darren explained so well, the framework of the CAP program. So thank you for doing this because it's a bit complicated. Yeah, so activity 5 was actually started before I got at CRAM. I arrived at CRAM in 2021. So I didn't see the start of this, and I didn't write these proposals. So I do want to give credit where it is due. And this activity originally belonged to Caroline Provost, who now left CRAM. So I wanted to say this very clearly before we started. The other thing I want to say is the title of this activity used to be Assessing Grapevine Cold Hardiness Under Climatic Conditions of Eastern Canada by Applying Various Techniques. But this is just a very convoluted way to say solutions for grape growing in cold regions. I think this would have been a better title, provided in hindsight, right? Hindsight is 2020. So a little bit about CRAM before I get going. So the Centre de recherche agroalimentaire de Mirabel, which just means Agri-Food Research Center in Mirabel, has 3 main areas of research: enology, viticulture. We also do crop protection in greenhouses, and we do entomology research in small fruit crops, mostly like beneficial insect and predation. We have a 2-hectare research vineyard, which is approximately 5 acres. You'll see a lot of hectare mentioned in my presentation. I'm sorry for the Canadian audience, but that's how we do it in Quebec. We have a lot of ongoing research on our research vineyard. It's a beautiful site, and we have a new cultivar trial. We have the grafting study that I'll talk about. We have a potassium accumulation study. We have geotextile trials that are ongoing. We have UV technology testings. We have testing of new frost protection methods, cover crop study. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of activity happening. So if you're ever in Oka or in Deux Montagnes in Quebec, just let me know. So a little bit about grape growing in Quebec to give you some context on the industry, again, for the Canadian audience who might not be familiar with it. This is the approximate percentage of land under vine, depending on hybrid and or vinifera, whether it's red or white. And you can see from this that most of the grape grown in Quebec are white hybrid, followed by red hybrid and a little bit of vinifera. Overall, white cultivars are favored in the province. We have a very young industry, like any other region in Canada. We are on track, like in terms of development, like other regions. We had it was launched a little bit in the 1980s, and it developed gradually, and we saw really an increase in production and in plantation in the 2000s and then in the 2010s. So it's been growing, developing, and now we are at 1,200 hectares of land under vine, and we have about 180 vineyards, one of which being the CRAM. In terms of breakdown of what cultivars we're growing, these are just the hybrid ones. In terms of vinifera, it's mostly Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, these more cold climate cultivars. But in terms of hybrids, putting them out there for people in rest of Canada that might be less familiar with all the other white and red hybrids we can grow. You can see that in the white, Vidal and Frontenac Blanc, Céval Blanc, and Frontenac Gris make up the majority of the grapes that are being grown. And for the reds, we see a lot of Frontenac, Marquette, Maréchal Foch, and then followed by many other small cultivars, smaller importance. We do see less interest in Frontenac Noir as we're progressing, as we're planting more grapes, but this is what it looks, that's what the landscape looks like right now. Growing grape in Quebec, like in other regions that are cold, it can be a bit of a challenge. So we do see a lot of rain in Quebec. We see between 500 and 900 millimeters of rain, depending on the year. It's a very humid place, lots of humidity, lots of fungal disease because of that. And we also see a very cold winter, as you might expect it. Everybody knows it's cold in Quebec, but it's really cold with minus 30 Celsius in the winter sometimes. Not every winter, but we do see it every like 4 or 5 winters, sometimes many winters in a row. We do see a thick snow cover, between 15 and 60 centimeters snow, depending on the time, depending when, between December and March. Quite predictable. This year we got a ton of snow, last year as well, tons of snow. But in some year we see barely any snow, at times that it's very cold, which is also a challenge. So the snow helps protecting the vines, but when it's not there, it's very challenging. And in terms of timing of phenology and things like that, I like to mention that bud break, we see bud break between early to mid-May, depending on the cultivar and the regions. And the colder regions tend to have bud break a lot, like maybe end of May sometimes. And harvest will typically take place in September and October, or October, with a fall frost often kind of halting the season. This fall frost often happening in October, sometimes late September. It's not ideal. So our season is not extremely long, but we do get at least 160 days of fall-free days annually, sometimes up to 200 even. You can see the map here on the side. I hope you can see my mouse. But on this map, I'm going to hide stuff on my screen, excuse me. This map shows the main regions, the main grape growing regions. It's just missing Quebec City and Saguenay, which are a lot more east and more north than the regions you can see here. So you have the city of Montreal, and you have main grape growing regions that are scattered south and around Montreal. And CRAM is located within the Deux Montagnes region, which is right here in dark on the map. And in terms of growing degree days, just to wrap up this presentation of Quebec, excuse me, I'm just gonna. In terms of growing degree days, what I'm showing you here is the growing degree days between 2015 and 2021 for 6 different sites. So you can see the cluster here for one of the region, for example. And you can see that we reach really good growing degree days for growing some vinifera. It's not extreme, it's not south of France, obviously, but we do get sometimes like above 1,500 growing degree days. And we do see a lot of annual variation. So from a bad year with less growing degree days, and a good year, we can see like 300-degree difference. So it makes for a real challenge at harvest, with some year having more maturity, some year less maturity. So lots of challenges associated to that. And also, you can see how variable it is between regions. So you can see here, for example, Saint-Paul d'Abbotsford. There's a lot of wineries around that region. And lots of winery around Sainte-Famille here, but this is a much colder spot that is kind of more towards Quebec City, a little more east, a little more north again. And you can see how different for the same years you'll have, like in variation in growing degree days. So yeah, lots of a very challenging landscape in Quebec, but good winemaking condition nonetheless, grape growing condition. For activity five that we had was separated into three main projects. The first project was to establish a cold hardiness monitoring system for many grape cultivars that are grown in Eastern Canada. So the goal was to capture things that are relevant for the Eastern Canada region. Of course, we're in Quebec, but make it Canadian relevant. The second part was to acquire information on the use of a winter protection system, namely the geotextiles, to reduce winter injury of cold-sensitive cultivar, mostly vinifera. And the last part was about the use of rootstock to improve cold hardiness of hybrid cultivar. So you get a sense, I'm going to be talking to you about these three kind of sub-projects within Activity 5. You get a sense there's a lot of information there, so I'll go quickly on everything, and then if you have a specific question, I can answer them after the talk. So to start off with the monitoring system, this was separated into two clear goals. First of all, to put in place this monitoring system, very inspired by Vine Alert in Ontario, what Vine Alert was doing. And the second part was to use data collected in the context of cold hardiness monitoring to build models of cold hardiness and better understand the impact of vine physiology and the climate on cold hardiness. A little bit of background. The reason why we were doing this, as some of you know, if you're growing grapes in Quebec or in Ontario, you already are very familiar with the fact that cold hardiness is very dynamic. It improves as the winter progresses. In the fall, we have a process of acclimation where cold hardiness is gained. We reach a phase of midwinter hardiness, which sometimes we call maximum hardiness, in which the hardiness of the vine is a lot more predictable, a lot more stable. And then we reach a phase of deacclimation where cold hardiness is lost, often very rapidly in the last few days before, in the few weeks before bud break. This is extremely weather driven, but there's also a lot of factors that will impact cold hardiness. We see that any factor that will impact vine health will have an impact on cold hardiness. Things like the presence of virus, the presence of nutritional deficiency in the vine, or the presence of waterlogged soil, for example, might all have a negative impact on hardiness. And hardiness is brought on by a very complicated set of physiological, and I like to say structural changes within the vine that you can't really see from the outside, but that are all happening inside the buds. And biochemical changes, accumulation of metabolite that really brings on these changes in cold hardiness as the season progresses. And it's very driven by the genotype or the type of cultivar. So we have here a list of different hybrid cultivar. Before we started the program, what were the expected cold hardiness for these different cultivars? And you can see how some cultivars like Vidal, for example, is expected to have a cold hardiness between -20 and -26, whereas something like Petite Pearl was expected to have tolerance between -29, -34. So the data was very approximation, and we were not sure what they were, what it was. But it does show that with some of these cultivars, for example, Vidal, and also all the vinifera, which all have lower cold tolerance than that, in Quebec with our -30, it's impossible to grow without cold protection method. So for the establishment of this bud hardiness monitoring program, we really followed the Vine Alert model, which is the program that was put in place at the Climate, Enology and Viticulture Institute at Brock University, or CUVI. We did a lot of sampling over the 3 years. We had much smaller sampling originally in the program, and we finished with a lot larger bud numbers as we progressed to get an even better approximation of the cold hardiness. We did biweekly sampling between October and April every winter, starting in 2019. And we've been doing this ever since, even when after the CAP program ended, we're still doing this to this day. We collect many data. We collect obviously cold hardiness by differential thermal analysis, but we also collect bud survival data. We collect yield and pruning weights. And we do data analysis exactly like the Vine Alert folks were doing, the CUVI people were doing, which is extracting data on lethal temperature for 10, 50, and 90% of the bud and communicate this information to grower as it's being collected and analyzed. We also monitor the data on site. We don't use other external, we don't use the weather from the government. We use our own weather monitoring system within each vineyard. So when there is weather data shared to growers, it is the data we've collected. For this activity, we had a lot of sites, which resulted in a lot of driving for the people in charge of this sampling, thanks to them. So the Deux Montagnes sites, this is where our winery, our research vineyard is located, and our lab with our equipment for analysis. And so a big territory was covered in the context of this activity and to capture cold hardiness across the main grape growing regions. And so a little bit of results. So yeah, I'm already going to jump into results. A little bit of results. I won't, as I prefaced, I want to repeat that I won't be showing a lot of results here, but you can go on the VineAlert website because it's all there. We've done 3 years of data collection as part of the CAP program. So the first year was 2019-2020, was very interesting because it started with a very late acclimation phase, which was a little worrisome. As you can see here, the lethal temperature on the y-axis and the date on the x-axis, and each color is a different cultivar. Obviously, the cultivars like Pinot Noir and Vidal and Chardonnay, like they couldn't be sampled throughout the winter because they were covered by geotextile, or sometimes they're buried. So they're only collected a little later in the year. But this first year was really interesting because it showed us how hardy these hybrid cultivar could get. And it also showed us how late acclimation could start in Quebec, which again was a little worrisome. And we saw also this phenomenon of deacclimation followed by a reacclimation, which this phenomenon had not been captured very well in literature yet. So we were really excited to kind of have a real clear picture of that for at least that year of the study. The second year, 2020 to 2021, I haven't said it, but these are the temperature, the purple line are the temperature outside. The second year was a lot more classic in terms of cold hardiness expectations, if you wish. We really had this acclimation at a time of the year that we were expecting it, followed by midwinter hardiness and this deacclimation. We did see how variable hardiness was in the winter. And this winter was not very cold. So you can see only a handful of time. I think it was 3 nights that the temperature dropped below -20. So for Quebec, that was pretty warm. Yeah, and that's also the year I came to Quebec and I was like, oh, Quebec is not that cold, but turns out Quebec was that cold. So actually the third year of the winter, I don't see anybody. But anyway, so the third year of the research of the project really showed us how cold and how the cultivars behave following these cold snap. So you can see how the temperatures outside dropped to -30 that year, and that overlapped with the LT50 of many of the cultivars we were tracking on many of the sites we were tracking, and we did see extensive bud damage following that winter. And I think this is a year where we really pushed the vine to their absolute maximum hardiness we would ever see. The buds that were still alive after this cold snap were very hardy. So 3 very variable winter, and the year ended up being the biggest driver of difference of hardiness. Another big driver of hardiness differences that we've identified is the site. So vineyard location, some vineyards are located in much colder region than others. And we see that this seems to have a very strong impact on cold hardiness. So this kind of very busy chart shows you the cold hardiness of Frontenac for the different site of one of the winter of the study. And you can see how variable during midwinter hardiness. Acclimation, very similar. Deacclimation is initiated at different time depending on where you're located, and midwinter hardiness is very variable depending on the vineyard. A site like Lanoret is a lot colder than site like, for example, here, which is Deux Montagnes, which is our research vineyard. And we see more than 5-degree difference in cold hardiness. So this can be very significant if you get a cold snap at -30 and you're not acclimated below -30, you get a lot of bud damage. So very major differences, but we are not able to explain them just yet, unfortunately. And the last really data-driven slide for this project I'll show you is about is the distribution of LT50 that were collected throughout the whole CAP activity. And what you see, each dot on this graph represent the LT50 for one site, one data collection date during the midwinter hardiness phase. So it's really this period that you're expecting not a lot of variation in cold hardiness in the winter. Each dot represents one data collection day for one vineyard for one cultivar. And the cultivars are Frontenac Blanc, Frontenac Gris, Marquette, Petite Pearl, and Saint-Pépin. And you can see how in the first year of the first winter of data collection, we had a lot of variation because acclimation was not really completed at that time. So we saw a lot of variation in cold hardiness within the cultivar, but also between the cultivar. But then when we got into winter 2 and winter 3, we saw very little difference in cold hardiness during that phase. So the box plot that are shown here, the little line in the middle represents the median of all the data that was collected. And you can see very little differences between all the cultivars. The only, the difference were actually not statistically significant. So it really showed us that there's not a lot of very obvious differences between these cold hardy cultivar in the middle of the winter. There's just a little trend of Petite Pearl having a little bit more cold damage, but we were not able to demonstrate it as part of this activity. In terms of kind of the modeling aspect of this project, our models that we attempted about vine physiology were less interesting than other modeling effort that have been done with this data. So I've decided to show you something we did with this data that is not us who built the model, but the data we collected ended up in this model. So I think I wanted to show you this because it's very interesting, I think. So the data we collected was sent to Dr. Wang and Dr. Londo at Cornell University, and they included it in their machine learning prediction model that they've built. So they built this cold hardiness prediction model that is not perfect, but is pretty accurate, except in deacclimation. But for acclimation and maximum hardiness, it's quite accurate. And this the prediction is made based on the weather or the temperatures on a site. So they built a website in which they access all the weather data that's available online. So in the United States, they have a lot of weather station available. And in Canada, they use the Environment Canada weather station. And if you go on their website, you can just click on the dot and it gives you the prediction for all the different cultivars that we sampled and what is the expected hardiness at specific dates. So it's really interesting. And if you are a grower in Quebec or in any region in Canada that have these cultivars, you can go check it out. The prediction model comes for these weird like Saint-Pépin and Petite Pearl cultivar mostly come from our lab. So in terms of, we've shared a lot of the data we've collected in terms of like conclusion for this part. We've built this cold hardiness through this CAP cluster. We were able to build the bud hardiness monitoring system for the Quebec industry. We originally published the data as newsletter. We published a ton of newsletters and we reached dozens and dozens of the Quebec growers. But we eventually ended up putting the data on Vine Alert instead of writing newsletters every time we have updates for people. So the data is now available on the Vine Alert website, which is really easy to find on Google. And you can also find the prediction model from Cornell that uses our data on their website. And in terms of kind of general conclusions, we were able to draw very general statements here in the interest of time, but we saw very important site and annual differences that are hard to capture in the model. So we need to collect more data to train the models we're building. We saw that the maximum hardiness of hybrids seems to be really reached. Like we really reach a point where they can't get more hardy. And if you go check the data on Vine Alert, you'll see for different sites what this hardiness looks like. And so we're able to document this and inform growers if they need it when they want to plant something, so they're aware. The difference in cold hardiness between hybrid is very small at the moment for these 6 hybrids that I've talked to you about. And what we also saw through this program was that the hardiness of Vitis vinifera was similar to that of hybrid until we put geotextile on or when we take them off. So it made us also see how much we didn't know about vinifera under geotextile, but that's a topic for later. In terms of our second part, I hope this is good. It's so weird to do this as a webinar and not get any feedback from people. But in terms of the second part of our activity 5, it was about geotextile. When it comes to geotextile, the goal of this part was really to acquire knowledge about geotextile. How well do they work and when do they work? And most importantly, develop optimal usage guideline about the timing of installation, timing of removal, and also about the different types of geotextile, whether there's a difference. So what you need to know about geotextile, if you're not in Quebec, is that in Quebec, approximately 95% of the vines that are being covered are covered by geotextile, covered for winter survival, or covered by geotextile. So this is data, self-reported data by grower to the Conseil des Vins du Québec. Doesn't apply to the entire industry necessarily, but most of the growers within the grower association use geotextile nowadays. And this has been a massive shift in the last 10 years, I would say. We cover every single vinifera needs to be covered, either buried, but mostly covered, as I say, because they can absolutely not survive. But we also have to cover a lot of hybrids like Vidal, Ceval, Maréchal Foch, Lucie Courmand, New York Muscat, Acadie. They grow really well, but they really need to be protected. And the geotextile represent very important technical and logistical challenges for the grower. They need to be installed at the end of the fall, like during the fall when it's harvest time. So we have small winery operation with not necessarily a lot of staff or big working teams. And so you need to shift your team from winemaking and harvesting to pruning and setting the vineyard, preparing the vineyard for geotextile installation. So that's like really, it's really challenging. And there's also not a lot of information, particularly when we started this project, there wasn't a lot of information available about how to use them best. So the questions we were answering with this part of the activity was, does the type of geotextile makes a difference on bud survival and on yield and on the vine in the winter? And is there, does the timing of installation and removal influence the physiology? So we tested 3 different types of geotextile. If you're looking into geotextile geotechnology, you'll run into these names a lot if you're interested in getting it for your vineyard. So we had Arbor Pro and 2 different thickness of Ibertex. Now there's more available. There's a lot more than that, but this is what we tested at the time. And I think it was really interesting, especially with the thickness difference, which we thought would have a big impact. We tested 2 timing of installation and 2 timing of removal. So generally kind of install, and we place them in combination with one another. So there was a total of 4 combination tested. So early installation, early removal, early installation, late removal, late installation, early removal, and late installation, late removal. So you'll see them referenced as these name a lot in the presentation. We had 5 different sites and 3 cultivars. We had Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Vidal over the 3 winter of the activity. So a lot of work for everybody with geotextile those years. And some of the sites, we also did combinations experiment where we tested the 4 combination of timing with the 3 combination of geotextile. So very big experimental plots. So in terms of results, what I think is the most one of the most interesting thing, or something that growers need to be very aware of, especially in those regions that are starting to consider geotextile, is how snow and geotextile act synergically to maintain these non-lethal temperatures around the vine. So you see here in black is the temperature outside, and in red is the temperature under the geotextile. And I've put a little marker to show you when there was a snow cover. I don't really need to even put this on because it's quite clear that in the winter, as the temperature are fluctuating outside, you get this phase of the winter here in between January and March that has, when we had a snow cover that year, that has like a stabilization of the temperature under the geotextile. So very important to note. I also want to point out how low it can get depending, the temperature under the geotextile will vary a lot when there's no snow cover. So that's something to keep in mind. We've done a kind of modeling attempt of the temperature under the geotextile to try to understand better when in the year are the temperature under the geotextile fluctuating the most. And so what you can see here is in red is the maximum daily temperature, in gray is the average daily temperature, and in blue is the minimum daily temperature. And the index we're presenting is the temperature under the geotextile minus the temperature outside. So when the data is located in the top part of the plot, that means that it was warmer under the geotextile. And when it's in the bottom part of the plot, that means, that means it was colder under the geotextile. And you can see that in the early phase, you can see that throughout the whole winter, regardless when we are, regardless what is happening, the maximum daily temperature is always higher under the geotextile. But when it comes to the minimum daily temperature, it tends to vary, and it can sometimes be lower under the geotextile. So there's some, and this phenomena is observed during acclimation and during deacclimation. So kind of parts of the year that are that have a lot of variation in cold hardiness and a lot of weather variation. So it's interesting to note, but when you're in the maximum hardiness phase, the part that's the most worrisome for Quebec growers, we see that even the daily minimum temperatures are always above the outside temperature under the geotextile. This is now showing you the temperature difference between the different types of geotextile. So we were expecting to see difference. That was our research hypothesis, was that the thicker the geotextile, the warmer the temperature under them. And here it's showing you the average temperature with the 95% confidence interval for the minimum temperature in blue, the average temperature in gray, and the maximum daily temperature in red. And you can see that there's no, for the 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, and the Arbo Pro geotextile, and you can see that there was no impact of the type of geotextile. There's no significant difference. Whether it's the minimum temperature of the day or the maximum temperature of the day, the type of geotextile did not have an impact here. This was also reflected in the yields. So this is just a graph showing you the yields for 2 different years for the different types of geotextile. And you can see that they were sometimes higher for one, sometimes lower for the same on another year. Very variable. The yields are always very variable in Quebec, but there was no statistically significant impact that was reproducible between sites or between years. When it comes to timing of installation and removal, what we notice is that although the statistical significance of these results is often low, we do see trends that I wanted to mention. We see that the timing of installation doesn't necessarily matter, but the timing of removal is a little more important. So here I'm showing you the cluster here is for late installation, early installation, and the 2 colors are for the timing of removal. So you can see that whether we install it early or late, it's roughly similar. Same thing here for another site. This is for Chardonnay for 2021. It's just an example. It's very representative of the data we've collected. You can see that there's a little difference. There's no difference whether it was installed late or early, but whether we removed it late or early, there is a difference in yield. So the blue is an earlier removal. So when we remove early, we have higher yields. So it's really, and we saw this, sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't, but in general, that was the trend, that the toe here in blue is the early removal is beneficial for yields, but small difference. So in conclusion for this part, and the answers we got here, is that we saw that there was not a big impact of the type of geotextile on the temperature. And because there was no impact on the temperature, there was probably no impact on yield or fruit quality. We saw that the timing of installation and removal did matter a little bit. And we think that it has to do with the temperature under the geotextile, particularly during acclimation and deacclimation. So this led us to, with the general statement about this phenomena, that growers should install the geotextile when you can, whenever you can, when you have time. Sorry, the word time is missing. When you have time, whenever you can, but you should remove them as early as possible. So in Quebec right now, for example, I wish we could remove our geotextile, but there's still too much snow left in our vineyard for that. But as soon as the snow is gone, we'll remove them. So the last activity we had, I hope I'm okay for time. I'm hoping Darian will jump in if not, is the part about rootstock. So this was interesting for me because I did this as part on vinifera as part of my PhD work, and now I was doing it, I'm looking into it for hybrid as part of this project. So the goal here, the main goal through the CAPs, like this rootstock work was a very long-term study we have going on at CRAM that's been going on since it was planted in 2013. And part of the CAP program was really to look at using the rootstock to improve cold hardiness of hybrid grapevines. We also looked at evaluating its impact on yield and berry chemistry and wine, like wine aroma profile. So I don't think I need to present what rootstocks are used for, but we know that rootstocks are used for phylloxera resistance in vinifera grapes. And because they are, rootstocks are from hybrid vines, they're from North American vines, that's what those vines are phylloxera resistance. Generally, when we plant hybrids, we don't put them on rootstocks because they're naturally resistant to phylloxera. But there was this question of considering that we know that rootstock have an impact on adaptation to different type of soil, different soil acidity, composition, drainage. We know they have an impact on vigor. We know they can have an impact on berry chemistry and aroma. We were wondering if they could have also an impact on cold hardiness. And there was no data, I think, at that time on using these rootstocks we have available on hybrids that are grown in Quebec. So a giant rootstock trial was launched that was set up at CRAM using these cultivars that are listed here, Adalmina, Baltica, Frontenac, Noir, Blanc, Gris, and Marquette, on four different cultivar and own rooted. So Pied-Franc is own rooted, 101, but you can see the cultivar listed, the rootstock listed here, very famous rootstock for our Canadian industry. And so we planted them in combinations, all of them in combinations, like all the cultivars on all the rootstocks. So you can see here the list of combinations we had that we planted. And so for each combinations, we have 8 vines of each combination, and those are little blocks, and we have 4 repetition of these blocks. So in a randomized complete block design. Very standard planting density. We did just standard Quebec practices here. And the soil, the data I'm going to present you is from like a very well-drained sandy loam soil. And I just want to specify this because rootstock have a lot of implication there. A little pictures of how it looked like when we planted and how as it's been growing. So the plantation was before the CAP activity, but I think the picture speaks for themselves, how well they've made in the Quebec climate. And the data we've been collecting were data on vine physiology, phenology, vigor, growth, period information, susceptibility to disease and mineral deficiency too, which I'll talk a little bit about. And obviously bud survival data. We didn't do differential thermal analysis there, but we did do bud survival. And we've also collected harvest parameters and did a lot of winemaking. The data we collected has been presented in a peer-reviewed paper that's available online, and this is an open access paper, so check it out. Here you can see it. I'm not going to read it all, but go look it up if you want some specific information. And the cultivars that are a part of this paper are Frontenac, Blanc, and Marquette, which is what I'll be presenting here for the most part. I'll just show you some very selected results that I think are particularly interesting. And I'll start off with bud survival. I want to say that there was no statistically significant impact of these cultivar on bud survival. So regardless, like I'm showing you 3 cultivar here, it was the same for the other ones too. It does look like 101-14 has slightly lower bud survival, but there was a lot of variation within the experimental plots, and this result is not statistically significant. When we look at growth, we look at the parameter of shoot length and trunk diameter, and the most interesting difference I thought was in terms of trunk diameter, where the Riparia Gloire grafted vines were always a little smaller than the other vines, particularly than the SO4 vines. But the difference were not enormous, but I did think it was a very interesting phenomena. Which does it has implication on bud hardiness? I think it would, but clearly it didn't. So interesting to mention. In terms of mineral deficiency, one that came out the most, like the biggest impact of rootstock was on the magnesium deficiency, where we saw a lot more deficiency on the own-rooted vine for the Frontenac-based cultivar, and less for Marquette. For Marquette, we saw more deficiency on SO4, so a lot of variation there. And when we look at yield per vine and berry chemistry, we saw kind of really not predictable differences necessarily. We did see that the own-rooted vine had higher yield for Frontenac Blanc, but this was not a result that was seen on the other cultivar necessarily. So a lot of variation in the data for the impact of rootstock here, and the difference we were seeing were not enormous either. And lastly, in terms of impact of the rootstock on the berry chemistry, we saw that on the Frontenac kind of genetics, so Frontenac Noir and Frontenac Blanc, slightly lower bricks for the own-rooted vine. So interesting, higher yield and lower bricks, so kind of less optimal berry chemistry, maybe related to the higher yield, I don't know. But otherwise, small differences on the total bricks, and then the impact on market was not the same as on Frontenac and was not really predictable. So in terms of outcome, we saw that the rootstock had an influence on those cold hardy hybrid, but the effect was very different based on the cultivar. And I do find that with these rootstock trial, and same thing that I saw with my PhD, is that you better pick a rootstock that's adapted for your type of soil and your drainage situation and mineral situation than pick for cold hardiness. But survival and vine development were generally not significantly affected by rootstock choice, particularly bud survival was not. Other parameters were to some degree, so check the article. If you have a very specific question, I would recommend going to see the article. And the rootstock, I think the takeaway was that rootstock could be a useful tool for adapting these cold hardy hybrid to your site if you have very specific situation, but they're not a mandatory thing. That is not a make or break thing that will change your site forever. So change the quality of your grape or your yields, for example. So looking ahead, like now that I've covered these three activity, I hope I'm okay for time again. Looking ahead, these three parts that I've talked about were part of activity 5, and they really inspired what we're doing now in activity 14. So in the first part of the project, the monitoring system of cold hardiness, it really led us to a lot more question about the difference in cold hardiness we were noticing and the variation between year to year and the impact of the temperature on all this. And so we really shift towards understanding better the interrelation of cold hardiness and dormancy. We now know that dormancy physiology has big impact on cold hardiness, and that's not something we were tracking before. So now our hardiness monitoring program also includes a dormancy monitoring program. And I think the two data together will also help us build better cold hardiness model. We're also working at understanding better the site difference and these year difference by looking at different hardiness related metabolites that could be of importance. The second part about geotextile led us into a much bigger geotextile study, but that this time is only on one vineyard, so it's a little easier to manage with that regard. And we really want to understand the impact of the geotextile on dormancy and on hardiness. So in the first year, in the first activity, we never opened the geotextile in the winter. But since that time, we've done a lot of little trials on our research vineyard, and we've noticed that we can open the geotextile here and there and get samples out to check where the vine at in terms of their dormancy status and where they're at in their hardiness. So we have a big experimental design where we look at many different installation date, many different removal date, and looking at the impact of the presence of the geotextile, not only on the vine, but also on the soil temperature, on the light that the vine is exposed to, and many other parameters. So I'm extremely excited for this. This, I think, will answer a lot of questions we have. And the part on rootstock was just trying to find ways to improve hardiness, but we don't really have a matching part in this new activity, but what we have instead is something that looks at cold protection using new technologies. So we're checking the impact of cellulose nanocrystal to build a a protective layer around the buds, either during the winter or for spring frost or even maybe fall frost. We're looking at using abscisic acid to improve max hardiness or to delay bud break. And we're also looking at using heated wire, potentially in combination with geotextile, potentially not, for hybrid or for vinifera, either to protect the vine in the dead of the winter instead of using these the wind machine, or for protecting against spring frost again, or maybe even fall frost. So a lot of work coming up, and yeah, it's gonna be really interesting. So I want to thank everybody at CRAM, obviously, and particularly Alexander Campbell and Jesse Tinsley, who are no longer at CRAM, but who have helped tremendously with these projects. And thanks specifically also to everybody at Covey and at Brock University for helping setting up the cold hardiness monitoring and the vine alert program and everything. The funding was very well explained by Darian already, and I do want to talk about a little word for Ellen Fisher, because she just passed away, and I do want to say, oh, I'm becoming emotional, but Ellen Fisher was a big role model, I think, for any researcher, especially female researcher in viticulture, and she contributed so much to research in this field in Canada. So I really wanted to say something, and I had a little picture of her with my good friend where she's enjoying her time. We were having a lot of fun at the happy hour at OFVC at the Covey booth with Anna Charnock. So I wanted to put this picture because I think it encapsulates how fun Ellen could be. It wasn't just always serious research. So that's it for me. And I'll take any question you might have. I hope I was okay for time.
Yeah, no concerns there. Thank you, Andréanne, and thank you for mentioning Helen. Yeah, she is a powerhouse in the research industry. It is a true loss, and she will be missed by many, many people. But to speak about your presentation, I just want to applaud you on being able to put together a presentation that takes extremely technical information and puts that into simplified terms, and especially when that comes to your graphs. I know that's not a simple task, but I know that that's something that the growers hope to see more of in more layman's terms, and that was feedback that we've gotten as well. So hopefully we can continue that moving forward. But before we go into the Q&A, and if anybody has questions, please put that into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, or raise your hand and we'll give you mic access. I just wanted to mention some things that I got from your presentation. So number one being that there was no statistically significant differences between the types of geotextiles, which you said you were a little bit surprised by, but the timing of when to remove that does matter. So the earlier you remove that, the higher the yield, but you said there was a little bit of a smaller difference in that yield. And if you don't mind, Andréanne, could you send us the link to the rootstock trial paper that was published? And then when we post this webinar, we will also have that link posted there.
Yeah,
if
awesome.
anybody wants
Absolutely.
to reference that. So we'll get into a Q&A. We have one already in the box right now. So it's talking about geotextiles. So what counts as snow cover in the context of geotextile? Are you thinking like 10, 30, 60 centimeters?
That's really good question. We've been wondering this. I don't have like a clear answer, but I know that as little as 10 centimeter has had an impact. So you don't need a lot of snow. It doesn't need to be fully covered. Something that will cover kind of like the first 20% of your geotextile, of the lower 20% of the geotextile on the ground, will have a big impact already. The more, the better, obviously. The other thing you need to know there is that often when you'll have geotextile, you'll grow the vines really low to the ground, a lot lower to the ground than what we would see if you're not using them. So you don't need as much snow if your geotextile a lot lower to the ground. So there's that to think about.
All right, thank you. I also I know this presentation and a lot of the research, it did focus more so on Eastern Canada being Quebec, but we have been hearing rumblings that growers in BC are curious about using geotextiles, but they worry about the lack of consistent snow. And this research it looked like at least it depended on some snow coverage. So can you comment on anything about that, and maybe there's been advancements in geotextiling?
Yeah, I'd be really curious about how well it's going to work. I know that I've a lot of people have reached out to me to ask me about snow cover and BC, how applicable this technology would be to the BC industry. Uh, there's many things here. Now, first of all, is with the data we have through this project and other projects we've done, if there's no snow cover and or very little and it's unpredictable, I wouldn't prioritize geotextile as a cold protection method because we really see how important snow is. We saw sites we had a couple of years ago, we were tracking temperature under geotextile for vinifera grapes and Pinot Noir in particularly. And we had on January 3rd, I think, it was minus 32 outside and there was no snow, and some sites got to minus 25 under the geotextile. So minus even 26, I think. And that place, we had only 10% survival rate of primary buds. So even with geotextile, we had massive crop loss. Of course, we didn't lose vine as much as maybe BC had last winter, unfortunately, but because the minus 26 won't necessarily kill the vine, but it did had a massive impact on the yield. So that was really sad. So I'd be really concerned to not have any snow cover. But the thing I want to say about this also is that nowadays there's new technology of geotextile installation. For example, all the work we did was you install the geotextile on your normal trellis, but a lot of now geotextile makers or companies installing these trellising system are pushing for these 2-section posts with arches that you put on top of your post section left. And that gives you like a geotextile cover that doesn't have any hole, that's really perfect. And they're also providing equipment to kind of bury the geotextile inside the earth, which really makes a very kind of a sealed environment. I don't have data on this method of installation. I don't know how well this works with or without snow, so I can't comment on that part. But I do want to say that when, these technologies are being presented, there's no data on this yet. So it will follow. In terms of installation strategy and their impact on protection, we don't have an ongoing project on that right now, but it's something we want to do. So a giant answer for a very simple question. I'm sorry. But I hope it made sense.
I think it definitely did, yeah. So I think it's something that's worth looking into, and maybe there could be some research projects if growers in BC are willing to take that on this year. I assume though that there would be a significant cost increase if you're looking at a geotextiling system that doesn't include snow, but you have to look
Yeah,
at
well,
competitors.
and I have a lot of hope for the geotextile, the combo geotextile heated wire, or just heated wire. There's new heated wire technology. There's 2 different ones actually right now. There's one with lights, the infrared lights by Frolight, but there's also heated wire technology that are just the heated electric wires. And both of those have really big potential. And I think this is another really interesting technology that could potentially work in combination with geotextile. But then the cost of growing grape becomes a little insane.
Yes.
So yeah, many factors to think about.
Many factors to consider, always, yeah.
I do want to say that what happened in BC last winter was really crazy. I think it was last winter. It was very it was really surprising, and there might not be a perfect solution to that kind of extreme weather event, right? So yeah.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, I don't think I see any at the bottom of the screen. So I think that is okay for us to wrap up the rest of our session here.
Sorry, Darian, I'll cut you off real quick. I see that there is a hand raised, so I'm
please, yeah, go ahead.
Hans's microphone there. Hans, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. It was really great, very interesting. A question on your first part on the cold hardiness. You had a slide on 3 years of data points for acclimation, and I think your first year acclimation was very, very slow compared to the others. Do you have any hypothesis? Well, was this a very late season of season start, or?
It was warm in the fall. I think there's some phenomena that we're not tracking very well right now. That is something that we're doing now as part of a new activity. Is this phenomena of like the variation in temperature between the day and the night. Like it's not just what the vines are exposed to, it's the variation between the daily minimum and daily maximum that they're exposed to that is actually the biggest driver of cold hardiness, of gaining cold hardiness and of acclimation. So depending on what the temperature the vines are exposed to, if there's not big amplitude of big differences, it might hinder the acclimation, slow down, reduce, affect negatively the acclimation process. So maybe that's what happened there. There's like different temperature profile during the acclimation phase, but honestly, we're not understanding this at the moment, and we haven't really observed it again since. So I think it was like one of these things that you get every few winter, like 1 in 8 or something like that, 1 in 10. And so unless we see it again and we can track it well, then I won't have clear answer about that, unfortunately. But it's really a matter of I think it's really a matter of what temperature the vines are exposed to. So there's something there. I just can't really tell you what it is precisely.
No, thanks.
Sorry.
All right, thanks, Hans. Ethan, is there any more questions coming in on your end?
No, and I think we're right at the end of time, so that worked out perfectly.
All right. Well, then I'll wrap us up for the day. So a special thanks to you, Andréanne, for sharing the final results from this very important research project. We look forward to continuing to work with you under the CAP framework to strengthen and improve Canada's grape and wine industry. So thank you to everyone for joining us. We'll continue to announce more webinars and events throughout 2025. So please stay tuned to our social media channels, our website, and our newsletters to be informed of this. This webinar, like I said at the beginning, is recorded and it'll be posted to our website if you ever want to revisit it or send it to your colleagues who are not able to attend. And lastly, when you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a brief survey where you can share your thoughts on today's session. We'd really appreciate it if you take that couple of minutes to fill this out. Helps us improve our future webinar sessions. As you've seen, we've tried to do that within our sessions moving forward. So I believe we're going to have a webinar coming up in tentatively May, and another one set for tentatively in July to cover some additional research results from our CAP cluster. So once again, thank you, Andréanne, for the wonderful presentation, to everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.